Hi friends, welcome to the Bible Project podcast. We're in episode 199 of our series Working Together Through the Whole Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and we're in part 130 of our season 2 where we're working together through the book of Genesis. But before launching into the text this morning, there's an important message, just something I want to discuss with you. As this podcast has grown way beyond my expectations, in fact, the Living in Faith Everyday podcast, that's the weekly podcast, has about 2,500 listeners downloads. But the daily podcast now is getting up in the high 30,000s. We're almost reaching the point of having 40,000 daily downloads, which is amazing. But alongside that comes certain challenges. I've noticed recently, particularly in the last few weeks, bearing in mind I record these podcasts about 10 days ahead, or that's the plan, that I'm getting increasingly more and more people reaching out to me on social media to share their stories, their difficulties, and to ask for prayers. I have about 2,000 people on the two Facebook pages as well, and I have people reaching out, asking for prayer, or trying even to video call me and get in touch that way. And I just have to say that I have reached the point where I'm struggling to deal with that situation, and have sadly reached the point where I feel the appropriate thing to say is that I'm unable to communicate one-to-one with people on social media. That being said, I want you to know that your needs and your prayer requests are being seen and read and heard, and most importantly, they're being prayed for. I've had some particularly, people facing particularly difficult challenges at the minute, reaching out. And I want you to know that you're being prayed for, and more than that, that those circumstances, those prayer needs are being shared, not in the detail of who you are, but in the detail of the situation and the circumstances, which are of course known to God. They're being shared with another group of Christians, and even sometimes with a larger group of Christians across several churches, and those prayer needs are being prayed for. So I just want you to know that it's not being ignored, but I'm not able to, and of course many times it's not appropriate as a married man for me to be communicating personally, particularly with single women, younger women on social media, which is why I've made the decision that I'm not going to be interacting personally with people on social media anymore. But having said that, thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing the challenges that you're facing and the prayer needs that you have. And know that I, my family, the care groups and the house groups to which I belong, and the churches to which I'm connected, are all praying for you in these challenging times. So anyway, that's where we are today, and we're just going to take a little bit of a segue out of the text and consider what Hebrews can teach us about this Genesis chapter 17. And the reason that I would remind you, the reason we do these studies is, and the reason I do them, is because I profoundly believe that the primary solution to all we need in life, and to our prayer needs, and to answer the challenges that we have, those answers, the primary source of them, lie within the Word of God. So many of you, I believe, will be helped, and my job is to create the best possible content that can help you navigate the challenges of life. And we're dealing at the moment with this covenant of circumcision as disclosed by God in the last episode that we looked at last time. And this is probably the first time in recorded history that humanity has established the idea that sacrifice was necessary to move on to a new place in our life. The principle of moving through loss and experience sacrifice in order to obtain something better is established here. Now, these days, it's easy to think we can move ahead in life without making a sacrifice, or think that we can just progress through life without dealing with some of the mistakes that we've made in the past. But the idea here is telling us that you have to sometimes give something up in the present in order to move forward. And that concept can't be overstated in helping us deal with the challenges of life. The idea being taught here is that God requires from us a degree of sacrifice, and that is entirely necessary to ensure that our future is the best it can possibly be, that our future primarily, firstly, is safe and secure, productive, and hopefully then eventually positive. Not just being mentioned here for the sake of Abraham, but also, as the covenant clearly states, for future generations that will follow on. And that follows on right on down to us today. However, there are two questions, I believe, that arise from that position. Firstly, what is the proper type of sacrifice that we're called to make? Because we saw previously, when we were further back in Genesis in the story of Cain and Abel, that there can be a right type of sacrifice and a wrong type of sacrifice. So there's something about a sacrifice that can make it correct, and there's something about a type of sacrifice that God can see it is not proper or appropriate. So if we're going to sacrifice, then we need to be sure to do it in a way that is respectful and correct before God. A sacrifice that is meaningful enough to deal with the past, but good enough to acknowledge and direct us into the future. And that was question 1. But question 2 might be, how good a life might we have if we make the appropriate sacrifices along the way? If we give up and sacrifice those things that God is calling us, and by nature it's challenging because they're sacrifices, how good might life become for us in the future? If Abraham's future could be guaranteed better for him and his family because of the sacrifices that he would make, and that we also know that from the Cain and Abel story that sacrifices can vary in quality, then just think about how much better our future and our lives could be if we make the proper choices and make the proper sacrifices along the way. Pick up the challenges willingly, make the sacrifice, move on, leave those things in the past. How good a life could you and I have if we could just get our perspectives right? How good things might be if we could sacrifice the things that are impeding us, if we could cut them off, leave them behind, and take away those things that are stopping us moving forward, both in our practical life and in our relationship with God, and by nature, in our relationships with those close to us. If only there was some way your sacrifice could be marked, made, and perfected by God itself. Wouldn't that be helpful if God had a plan of a way that we could sacrifice? Well, he did have friends. Christ's passion and death on the cross is what some would call an archetypical sacrifice. Firstly, the events are true, but they're not just true in history, because they also stand as a way of demonstrating a kind of example, if you like, of the limits of sacrifice, the perfection of the sacrifice. Christ's sacrifice demonstrates perfection. And why I say that, because it's the worst of possible things that could have happened to the best possible person. The book of Hebrews is helpful when it looks at this. It tells us in chapter 9, verse 14, since this is true, how much more is accomplished by the blood of Christ? Through the eternal Spirit he offered himself as a perfect sacrifice to God. His blood will purify our consciousness from useless rituals so that we might serve the living God. So there we are. The sacrifice that Christ made is perfect and does the job. It's a story that lays before us the plumb line, the representation of Jesus Christ as making the perfect sacrifice on our behalves. So that's the territory that we're living in the 17th chapter of Genesis. That is the foundation stones that these Genesis stories are laying, that will be fulfilled fully in the coming of Christ 2,000 years later. And as we work through these Old Testament stories, we can use them as an anchor for us in life. So we too can continue to lay the foundations of our faith together as we work through the Bible together. And we shall continue to do that, friends, in the next episode. Thanks for joining me, and bye for now.